Okay, good afternoon, everybody. If I could just have your attention, please. Thank you all for coming here today. My name is Gavin Manu. I'm the publisher of the East Hampton and Southampton Press, the Sag Harbor Express, and 27east.com. Welcome to our press sessions event today. We'll be discussing the future of the East Hampton Airport. Obviously, this is a big topic. It's been around for as long as I can remember, and it's complicated, I'm sure contentious, so we're hoping to have a productive and respectful conversation here today on this issue. I do want to thank Rowdy Hall, all their team here. They've been great hosts for us. Thank you, Rowdy Hall. I'd like to just take a minute to recognize some members of our team who are here with us today. Ellen Diogardi is our Director of Events at the door. Thank you, Ellen. Two of our reporters, Michael Wright and Peter Booty, are here today. Our photographer, Kirill Bromley. Our managing editor, Bill Sutton. The editor of the East Hampton Press, Virginia Garrison, and Virginia will be in the back with a microphone for anybody back there who'd like to say some comments. Our executive editor, Joe Shaw, and my wife and co-publisher, Catherine Manu, who's in the back of the room. Thank you all for joining us. This is our 10th sessions event that we've had since September in Southampton, East Hampton, Sag Harbor. We're talking about issues that matter to us, affordable housing, water quality, obviously the airport today. So we really appreciate all of you coming out and supporting us and hopefully talking through some issues to see some action. We have seen these conversations lead to development in positive directions. So we thank you for coming, and I do want to thank, of course, our sponsors who really help us make these possible. We have two presenting sponsors, Rocco Carrero Wealth Advisors. Rocco couldn't make it here today, but also the law firm of Toomey, Latham, Shea, Kelly, Dubin, and Corderaro. Chris Kelly is with us today. Thank you very much for your support. Also, we have two session partners. The Adam Miller Group has been a big supporter of ours. Adam couldn't make it today, but thank you to the Adam Miller Group. And also to Advantage Title. Their office is right across the street here. Chris Nuzzi and Amy Spiros are with us today, and they've been a tremendous supporter of ours. Thank you both. Lastly, I just want to take a minute to thank LTV. They've been a great partner of ours from the beginning in Sag Harbor. They film these sessions for us, obviously, and it allows those who can't make it here an opportunity to watch the conversation and follow along. So thank you to LTV for all your support. So I would now like we'll move on to the conversation. Joe will introduce the panelists and we'll get started. Joe?
Thank you, Gavin. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. We really appreciate it. I do kind of feel like because of the folks in the room, there's probably not a need for a real in-depth introduction to the issue. I think everybody's more or less aware of the issues here. But for those tuning in at home, part of the conversation is because efforts to control noise at the East Hampton Airport haven't been all that successful so far. And so the town is now saying it may close the airport altogether when the FAA's grant assurances expire in September 2021, which is less than 2 years away. That would obviously answer the complaints of people living nearby the airport who are affected most by the noise of incoming and outgoing flights, particularly the helicopter noise, which have been increasing as the charter helicopter companies have gotten bigger and bigger. But it also would have an enormous effect on the aviation industry, both commercial and recreational locally. So what we want to do today is have a conversation. And Gavin talked about this briefly. I want to point out the Sag Harbor Express began their express sessions in early 2018. And we were different companies then. And I was really impressed with that because I think having these kinds of conversations, conversations are a lost art these days, especially when it comes to big issues. People are really good at offering speeches and making declarations and making arguments about their side of issues, but there really isn't much of a conversation. A conversation is about talking and listening. And I saw from the minute that the Express began press sessions, bringing people in small groups into a room just like this, serving them lunch and having a discussion, good things happened. Didn't fix every single issue, but really got conversations going in a way that they needed to get going. As Gavin said, we've had 10 of these since we merged in July, And I've loved every one of them. I really enjoy having these kinds of conversations. So, I think one of the things we want to do today is really have a conversation. So I'd ask you all, I think a lot of folks in the room have strong opinions one way or the other. I'd ask everybody to have a conversation about this. We don't want anybody to hold back. Give your views, give them powerfully, but let's keep it a conversation. Let's keep it civil. Let's see if we can find some solutions. There are some questions we want to answer. Is closing the airport the only option at this point? And if not, what else might be an option? We also we want to ask what the impact would be, what it would take for the airport to survive. What is going to need to change to make that happen? And if we can agree that noise over residential neighborhoods is a problem, we should talk about how we can resolve that if closing the airport isn't the answer. So I want to point out, too, by the way, that we did reach out to a number of the helicopter charter companies to be represented on the panel today, and we didn't have any luck in getting anyone. We really did want them to be part of this conversation. They didn't agree to take part in it, but I want to let everyone know that we did make an effort to do that. But I think we do have an excellent panel, and so I would like to introduce them now. And I'll tell you very briefly that this is a conversation. We're going to ask each of the panelists one question, give them a chance to answer it, and then we're going to open it up to the floor. Virginia Garrison, who is our East Hampton press editor, is going to be in the back of the room with a microphone for you folks. I'll be up here to hand the microphone around. If you have something to say, a question, a comment, please just catch one of us, catch one of our eyes. I told the panelists the same thing. They're entitled to ask each other questions and to join the conversation as necessary. So let me start going left to right on our panel. We'll start with the panelist right in front of me, who is Jeff Bragman. He is East Hampton Town Councilman. He is also the liaison to the town's aviation committee. Jeff, what would it take for the town to decide to close the airport or not to close the airport? What would be a satisfactory solution to the question? And what can the town demand from the aviation community as an alternative to closing the airport?
Hi, glad to be here, or at least we'll see how that, whether that lasts. I'm going to divide that question up a little bit. I do want to talk about what it would take to decide, because it ties into what you said about having a conversation, and it may not be an either-or decision about the airport. I think it's important to focus on the process that we're going to need to follow in order to reach a decision, and I'm hoping that we can establish something that is informed by facts and not by fear. We need a deliberative process, and that means a process where the public can have an ample opportunity to have input, and we have to create a format so that we can have a sensible exchange of ideas. We need to listen to all the points of view, because I've said repeatedly that we on the town board lead better when we listen. A lot of the topics, so I think it would be important in this process to generally address single topics or groups of topics that are related at a time. Some of them are quite obvious. We're going to need to discuss the zoning, the aquifer that the airport is situated on top of, prior contamination, Superfund sites. We'll also have to have a good look at the setting, the preserved lands, public and private wells, the surrounding uses, and important features that are nearby, like Georgia Capon. These things are pretty apparent, just to get our feet on the ground so that we all know the area that we're talking about. Some of the more specific airport topics will be the economics of the airport, who uses the airport, who's employed there, where do folks travel, where do they go, what would happen if traffic were diverted from that airport if the airport were closed. And on the flip side, for folks who are less enthusiastic about the airport, we certainly have to discuss noise pollution. I think with a view in mind that we treat our residents exactly the same way as we treat folks who live further out of town, because both have to be accommodated. We have to look at the pollution that's caused from aircraft in flight, which recently has been highlighted as an aggravating factor in our climate crisis. We have to look at impacts on air quality that we breathe, ground pollution, and I think overall look at our carbon footprint of the airport and see how that meshes with our goals for energy renewability. I want to avoid for a moment the question of the either or, what do we do to have an airport? What do we do to not have an airport? And move on to the second part, which is what would be a satisfactory solution? And again, I don't want to start with airport or not airport. It's not really to be or not to be here, because this part of the question, I think, highlights an important element in the review process, and that is we have to consider alternatives, and that means non-airport alternatives as well as airport alternatives. And we have to consider the property not an airport property, but the town property, and view it as such. And the community has to look at it as a blank slate, much in the way that we did when we undertook hamlet study plans, where we tried to come up with a vision of how we would change the center of our hamlets to make them more livable and responsive to the goals that the community wanted. It's the same thing if we undertake a revisioning process. We have to know that the property may be a blank slate, but it's got constraints as well as great possibilities. One thing that comes to my mind is some kind of solar installation there. It's a large piece of land. Much of it is disturbed. Some of it is highly sensitive and protected. And we're going to need some planning help to consider realistically what kind of alternative visions we could have for this rather large tract of land that's probably one of the most valuable pieces of land in the country. The last part of the question was, what could the town demand from the aviation community as an alternative to closing? And I have to say that on that point, it's not really a demand as much as what values could we insist on having honored and protected in negotiating. And we can't forget that the FAA will likely remain a very important partner in those discussions. So ignoring for the moment non-airport alternatives, which could be significant in the discussion, and maybe putting this in the context of a possible airport closure, we can focus on moves that would change the scale and intensity of this airport as it now exists. We could very well examine our infrastructure and see if we could make changes to reduce the capability of the airport. And we could make an effort to change the infrastructure to make the airport more in keeping with its history as a place for local recreational pilots. I've been out in town. I don't live right near the airport, but a couple miles away since 1984, and I remember a very different airport, as many of you may as well, an airport that was primarily for local recreational pilots and really did not intrude on the community as the airport does now. We could also discuss limiting our hours of operations for all aircraft that come in and out. We could attempt to rationally and non-discriminatorily apply noise rules, perhaps using FAA noise signatures for aircraft to eliminate certain aircraft that are problematic. And I don't think it's any secret to say that helicopters would fall into that category. So I think there are many ways in which we could rationally apply noise, safety, environmental considerations to reduce the capability of the airport and to limit the type of aircraft that come in and have that work to actually reduce the quantity of air traffic, because that is the only thing that's going to solve the problems that we're confronted with. We could discuss the types of services that we currently provide, including fueling, and we could decide whether or not we wanted to have that capability at the airport, and we could examine the type of fuel that we provide for the type of aircraft. The idea would be to create an airport that better balances the values that gives East Hampton its national reputation for beauty and tranquility and environmental protection, and better balance the interests of local residents. I know we've talked a lot about the importance of these ultra-luxury travelers who value their time and need to know that they can get in and out of East Hampton very quickly. But I take the position that regular folks who live in East Hampton also value their time, and it's equally important whether you're minding your kids or working in the food pantry or doing other kinds of community service. I can't say that we can place a higher value on the captains of industry and the folks that need to get in and out of East Hampton as quickly as possible. I tend to have a stronger focus on the folks that aren't as worried about getting in and out but are here all the time. I can say that this with to be a little bit more perhaps direct about my feelings about things that won't work. We cannot stay on the course that we have of unregulated growth of the airport. We can try to reroute traffic. I wouldn't object to that, but I don't see it as a solution. It's not a solution to inflict my noise on my neighbor by moving the routes around. And if you've ever attended any of our meetings and talked to folks from Riverhead, Southold, and other points to the west, you can see the terrible harm that the airport noise is inflicting on everyone. And I will not accept a solution that harms our neighbors to protect ourselves. I just don't think that's a moral or defensible a policy. So, you know, I can just finish up. To those who say that we have to accommodate the ultra-luxury travelers, I think we also have to accommodate the values that make that airport fit. And if we can't do that, then closure is an option, but it's not necessarily an option. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. I think you laid out a lot there for us to chew on, and we can circle back and talk about some of those issues in a lot more detail, too, going forward. So thanks for that. Next to Jeff is Evan Catarelli. He is operations manager at Sound Aircraft Services, fixed base operator at the airport. Evan, how many people are employed at the airport, and what do you see as being the actual benefits of the airport, economic and otherwise, beyond the salaries of airport employees?
Thank you. Over the course of the year, the airport ensures the employment of about 60 people, including full-time, part-time, and seasonal, of which 25 are directly employed by Sound Aircraft. We're the largest employer based at the airport, and we're owned by an East Hampton native for the past 30 years. Addition to us is a variety of aviation, non-aviation companies that employ the remaining employees, all of which service residents and passengers of the East Hampton and the surrounding towns, including Shoreline Aviation, NetJets, Blade, and Sound Aircraft Flight Enterprises, who all have offices and leases on the field. They provide additional air transport and aviation services to homeowners and residents on the East End, and they're further serviced by Hertz and Enterprise also on the field. The airport has been servicing Hampton residents and non-residents for over 80 years and has turned into an essential vehicle to drive business into East Hampton, the surrounding town, including us. Like I said, we've been there for 30 years. It's a gateway for many of the East Hampton and East End homeowners and visitors. And it is conceded that over the years, aircraft operations have become a contentious issue and do need to be addressed in order to keep the airport viable. But nonetheless, the mission of those aircraft stays the same, bringing East End residents to and from their places of work and leisure in New York City and elsewhere. The East Hampton Airport allows the residents of the East End and the homeowners to maintain those who travel, a residence in the East End and their families in the community as well, and the environment that has become so prized out here. Many of the passengers that pass through our facility have been doing so for decades. We used to do charter work and see the same people over and over again commuting to and from work, and many of them do so year-round. They are also a far wider spectrum than just the super rich that have been spoken about already. They include owner and operators that pilots of small single-engine airplanes. We have some that own single-engine 172s that commute to work from the airport, twin engines, and up to larger jets as well. The East Hampton Airport is invaluable in fostering the next generation's interest in aviation. It's the first contact that many in the community have with aviation. And we have a large variety of aircraft, which small single engines to large corporate jets, that allow them a unique opportunity to see how those operations happen that most other small town airports do not. We have a chapter, the EAA Young Eagles, that just opened up, and they help to nurture aviation interests, giving short introductory flights to children and teens, as well as multiple flight instructors on the field. And many of us got our first jobs in aviation at the East Hampton Airport, myself included. We've drawn extensively from local colleges for our line service and customer service staff, and many of those former employees have gone on to become industry professionals, including pilots and airport management staff. The airport also provides a necessary landing point for law enforcement, medevac. Volunteer organizations such as PALS, the Patient Airlift Service, uses the airport to bring patients in and out of the field, and some of our local pilots are involved in that also. In recent years, we've seen increase in community activities at the airport, including Just Plain Fun Day that Kent and his group hosts, as well as the Run Down the Runway 5K. And in a wider benefit, the airport does benefit the local economy, as homeowners and passengers utilize the airport are also patrons of local restaurants and shops and resorts. The homeowners use the services of construction and local tradespeople, and are contributing to the optimistic and active real estate market in the area. While a percentage of them are part-time, they are still homeowners and residents nonetheless, supporting the community through property taxes, patronage of local businesses, and philanthropy. A 2017 report that we found called the Second Homes and Tourism, a Core Industry of East Hampton Town, which the airport helps to support. 63% of the homes on the East End are second or seasonal homes and account for 72% of the town's property taxes. Top industries in the town are all tied to second homes and tourism, including retail, hotels, restaurants, construction, and so on. And it's estimated that in season, the population over the weekend triples from about 23,000 full-time year-round to 70,000 on a weekend. That includes second homeowners. An economic study by the Rudin Center in 2014, direct impact of $48 million to the town, and estimated about $500 per passenger per day that travels through the airport. And that's on things like restaurants, entertainment, and retail shopping. In closing, for the better part of a century, continual air service has been a vital community lifeline for full and part-time homeowners in the East Hampton town and the East End, and the airport is an integral part of the community and an economic engine that's helped facilitate the local economy, connecting East End residents and visitors to points west for over 90 years. It's the 1930s, the town applied for WPA funds to build the airport to further enhance the community service, and as an article in 1936 said, to provide accommodation for our friends who travel here. And Sound Aircrafts have been working in conjunction with the East Hampton Town, Airport Management, and the Eastern Region Helicopter Council to come up with solutions, including routes and compromises, that will help keep this going for a long time. And we're encouraging the Helicopter Council to adopt routes that remain over water for the entirety of the North Shore and South Shore.
Thanks, Evan. Pat Trunzo. Pat Trunzo III is a former town councilman and a member of the Airport Advisory Committee, and also a founder of the Quiet Skies Coalition. Unlike Say No to HTO, the Quiet Skies Coalition historically has not supported closing the airport, although it has said it hopes for reductions in noise impacts. What can be done under the existing circumstances that could lessen the impacts on residential neighborhoods?
Thank you, Joe. Just an opening comment. When Virginia invited me to participate, I said, is that because I'm the Methuselah on this issue? I've been involved in this issue and working on it for 40 years, starting in my days back in law school.
I need to make sure you do this.
Oh, sorry. Didn't realize it had to be that close.
Yes, very close.
Anyway, so 4 decades I've been looking and working on this issue. So yes, Quiet Skies has not felt that closure is automatically and necessarily the answer to the airport noise problem. And we very much helped initiate, develop, and enact the restrictions that the town board attempted a few years back to impose some curfews, and then as a second part, which never went into effect, to start to restrict the numbers of operations, particularly by noisy aircraft, that were occurring at the airport. Unfortunately, those regulations were challenged, and in my opinion, we should not have lost in court, but we did. Particularly galling and insulting was the decision by the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which had made a landmark ruling in the National Helicopter case, basically overruled that decision sub silento and told us, the town, that didn't have any proprietary rights to enact such restrictions. If it wanted to do so, it had to do a Part 161 study. So that's kind of where things ended after that attempt. Unfortunately, in my opinion, the town board is not actively pursuing a 161 study. Ironically, I think they're going to end up doing a 161 type study to address all the factors that Councilman Bragman reeled off when he was going over things. You have to look at the economics, you have to look at the airport environment, you have to look at the broader economic impact on the community. one thing that I think hasn't gotten enough emphasis about this pollution problem, and it is a pollution problem. We have an externality, noise, generated by a very small segment of the population and an industry that serves them that is impacting thousands of people, tens of thousands of people all season long in the summer. And another irony here is the greatest of those impacts are not imposed on East Hampton town residents. They occur on our neighbors to the north and to the west. And that's because by historic happenstance, the airport is located at the very western edge of the town of East Hampton. So with the traffic from New York City, not much of it traverses the rest of the town to the east. So we still think that some degree of control by this town needs to occur in order to address this problem. There has to be reductions in the numbers of operations. And I mean, I can throw out a lot of statistics, but the last full review of operations that the town board had presented in February of last year, in the growth in helicopter traffic from 2016 to 18 was 53%. I mean, that's just astounding. In 2 years, the numbers of operations increased, by half again. And the overall numbers are also astounding. At the busiest times, this airport equals or rivals the degree or the frequency of operations at LaGuardia. I mean, there are over 100, that same report said at the busiest times is over 115 operations per hour. Now, all of those operations don't impact the same people over and over again, but the worst cases, and there's someone here from the North Fork who lives near the Northfield fuel depot, not unusual for that individual to experience one helicopter operation per minute or less for hours on end. I mean, to me, that's absolutely unbearable to ask somebody to put up with that degree of imposition by these aircraft. Seaplanes as well also have become a more prominent part of the noise problem. Part of that, I think, is because of the way they conduct their operations. There's no technical or physical reason why a seaplane can't fly at higher altitudes. They tend not to, I think, in the interests of time and money. It takes time to go up and takes more time to come down. And they are particularly noisy aircraft, too. They're turbine aircraft, and they're noticeable for long periods of time as they approach, go overhead, and go away. The one thing I will say about operations, back in the days when I was a town councilman, some of the worst problems were caused by jets. And we even for a time had a stage 1 jet operating out of East Hampton. And that, I believe, could be heard from Amagansett to Bridgehampton. Fortunately, and this is the one place where the FAA, after 2 decades of stalling and not doing anything, forced the industry to develop quieter technology. It shouldn't have taken over 2 decades to achieve that, but it has arrived, and now there are stage 4 and 5 jets that are incredibly quiet. My company has a woodworking shop less than a mile from the end of the main runway. Those jets fly directly overhead, and I mean directly, and they're maybe 200 feet above my head. And I can hear them maybe 15 seconds in advance of their being overhead, and another 20 seconds later, they're gone. So, and the noise that they make when they're directly overhead is incredible. You can still have a conversation with that happening. Last thing I'll say before I hand the mic over is, Jeff mentioned that he thinks we have to work with the FAA. To me, that's a fool's errand. This agency is a captive agency. They have not lifted a finger until Congress beat them over the head, and it took 2 tries of Congress mandating that the FAA force the development of cryogen engine technology. And the recent issue with the 737 MAX. FAA handed over the safety regulation of that aircraft to Boeing, who got it wrong, obviously, with those crashes. So for them to be looked upon as a partner in helping to solve this problem, to me, is really, you're dreaming.
Thank you, Pat. Patricia Currie is a Noyak resident, and she is co-founder with Barry Raybeck of Say No to KHTO, which aims to have the airport closed. Patricia, what could be changed, if anything, that would convince you that the airport doesn't need to be closed?
Thank you very much. That seems a deceptively
Right up here.
easy question to answer, but it really isn't. In 5 towns on the East End community and areas as distant as New York City, thousands of families are severely impacted by East Hampton Airport. If anyone today suggested building an airport on 600 acres of town land above a sole source aquifer to welcome 30,000 or more flights every year, they'd be run out of town. But there is a noisy, polluting airport here. It's right at the edge of the village, and it is a problem for many. Despite thousands of complaints on safety, health, and environmental issues, the FAA has been unresponsive to residents, and the aviation industry has been unwilling to self-regulate. This meeting today is the outcome of 2 decades of their failure to compromise. When the Supreme Court declined to hear East Hampton's case for local control, it concurred with decisions by lower courts and empowered the FAA to rob any town in the United States of the right to control its airport. The dream of local control died there. The FAA has given unfettered access to the airport to many out-of-town and out-of-state corporations and to a few dozen or so local owners and pilots. DC area aviation lobbyists are working with them now to ensure that access will never be blocked. Reckless, low-altitude, high-speed flights by commuter operators, often in poor visibility and bad weather, will be permitted for as long as the airport is operated as an airport. Economic benefits touted by aviation components are inaccurate, and only when the town undertakes an economic analysis can informed discussion begin. To end East End residents besieged by aviation, no amount of economic benefit can exceed the value of the health and safety of our families and our environment. In a climate emergency, and we're in one, it's impossible to justify 38 million pounds of carbon emissions dumped every year from unnecessary private journeys to and from KHTO, or trucking to East Hampton 900,000 gallons of fossil fuels every year for sale at a town-owned facility. The town, of course, has a goal to reduce the use of fossil fuels, so that's kind of antithetical. We can go sit on Main Beach and stick our heads in the sand, but when our children ask, why are we hell-bent on destroying the planet, how do we answer that question? What do we say? Do we say, well, we wanted the convenience of an airport? In 2021, the town will have the opportunity to again become stewards of its own land. Income from responsible uses of that property could help fund affordable housing and other desperately needed projects in town hamlets. Probably the most obvious one is solar installations. It seems to be everybody's favorite choice. Say No encourages the town to end the chaos and danger, preserve its property, protect our sole source aquifer, and transform the land to clean, sustainable uses that will benefit the people of East Hampton. In short, the answer to your question is this: nothing that has not already been considered will make much difference. There is no way to manage the airport. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patricia. To her left is Kent Feuerring. He is president of the East Hampton Aviation Association and a member of the Airport Advisory Committee. Kent, what would you most like people like Patricia who would like to see the airport closed to understand?
Well, thank you, Joe, and thank you all for showing up for the discussion. It's a very important asset to our community. Firstly, closing the airport will result in the permanent loss of several important benefits to our community. I believe it will have a devastating effect on our local economy, local businesses, and real estate values.
Make sure you hold the mic.
Okay. The airport provides a safe transfer location for critical emergency services and life-saving medevac services to all members of our community. The airport also acts as an indispensable access point and central staging area for emergency services in the event of a natural disaster or catastrophic event. Additionally, the airport acts as a very important environmental refuge for over 90 native plant, animal, insect, and bird species that are listed as endangered, threatened, or species of concern. Closing HTO will not eliminate the helicopter noise. The demand for commuter and transfer helicopters into the Hamptons will continue to exist. I believe the helicopter companies will adapt and seize the market share lost by the fixed-wing jets and airplanes because of the closure of the airport. They will simply land at Southampton Heliport, Montauk Airport, and will use floating helipads in the bay. These are already being used in places like Miami. Regarding the East Hampton Aviation Association, we have always worked closely with our community to solve our noise issues. I think there's a misperception that pilots don't care about our community and we care more about flying. This could not be further from the truth. I have raised a family out here. I love our community deeply. As president of EHAA, I have worked hard over the past 3 years to bring all of the members of our community, including the noise affected, to the table. We can come up with a solution if we work together.
Thank you, Kent. Eric Atkins is from Shoreline Aviation, which is a seaplane operator whose planes land at East Hampton Airport. Eric, accepting that aircraft create noise impacts and that the town has said that it will consider closing the airport, what changes could be made by charter helicopter and seaplane companies like yours to reduce the noise impacts?
Thank you. Before jumping into the answer to that question, I want to explain a little bit who I'm here representing. Shoreline Aviation has been providing seaplane service to the Hamptons and all of Long Island since 1980, so we've also been around for 40 years. I personally have been with the company for over 20 years and currently serve as the general manager and the vice president of seaplane operations for Cape Air, who has recently become our parent company. As the oldest and largest seaplane operator in the market, we've enjoyed the loyalty of our customers who represent a substantial portion of the tax base in East Hampton. Indeed, we have clients who have been flying with us for 3 generations, as we provide the best way to get back and forth to their East Hampton estates from New York City. As we hope to continue doing so for many years, let me address the question at hand. The future is electric. Noise has long been a topic of consideration for our operation and even played a big role in our decision back in the early 2000s to eliminate the piston-engined airplanes from our fleet. The Cessna 185 and 206s that we used to use had poorer performance, therefore operated with a much larger noise footprint than the current fleet does. We eliminated those aircraft from the fleet because we are sensitive to the needs of the community. As we are serving the community, it's in our interest to do so in a way that makes everyone happy. We haven't gotten there yet, but we have a plan to do so. Even these measures so far have proven to be less than adequate, as aviation on the East End has become the enemy of those who don't use it. We recognize that the best way to coexist is to reduce our noise footprint and to become greener in the process. To that end, Cape Air has taken the extremely bold step of entering into an agreement with Aviation to become the launch customer for the all-electric airplane Alice. We intend to be the first airline in the world to operate an all-electric fleet of aircraft in scheduled service, which will not only be greener, but substantially quieter than anything in operation today. I'd like to address a couple of the points that were made previously in that regard, which I don't have in my statement. But first of all, with solar, it's a perfect match for the coming electric revolution in aviation, which is going to be absolutely unstoppable. Second of all, solar coexists with airport property better than any other property that I can think of. And there's no reason that the runways can't remain while a huge solar installation enjoys the benefit of the property as well. Pollution. To eliminate the use of fossil fuels from all of the aircraft that utilize the airport is absolutely a possibility. This is coming whether we like it or not. I don't know what the time frame is, but the momentum that's currently behind the movement for electrification of aviation is tremendous. According to the Vertical Flight Society, I looked at the website this morning, and they show in active development, these are companies that are working toward new aircraft. There are 206 different electric and hybrid electric aircraft on the list. And frankly, that's not even all of them. For those that would argue that this transition will take too long, I submit that the sea change is coming and as I mentioned, gaining momentum. Though it won't happen overnight, the progress is undeniable. As recently as December 10th, Harbor Air in Vancouver, BC, flew the first electric seaplane from the Fraser River. This was a converted de Havilland Beaver, and they had a successful flight demonstrating that electric flight is absolutely possible today, not 20 years from now. Harbor Air has the same intention as Cape Air does, so it'll be interesting to see who is the first all-electric scheduled airline in the country, probably the world. More than new routes, more than altitude mandates that only work sometimes, more than airport curfews, electrification is the long-term answer to the noise nuisance. Until we are able to implement the new solutions, Shoreline Aviation and Cape Air are committed to working with the community to find a mutually agreeable solution to continue providing this valuable service to the residents of East Hampton and surrounding towns. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Finally, we have Mark Woolley. He is the District Director for U.S. Representative Lee Zeldin. Mark, what does Congress have the power to do? Could Congress dictate that aircraft follow an overwater route? Can Congress allow the town to set specific flight schedules to a general aviation airport like KTHO?
Good afternoon. There's a photo next to me of this gentleman holding a beer with his thumb up, and I'm wondering if he knows something I don't know. I'm glad that the gentleman next to my right is here today to represent the seaplanes. I think that speaks volumes. And I will get to your question in a moment, but I do want to say that not having members of the Eastern Region Helicopter Council here today also unfortunately speaks volumes. Let me talk just slightly a bit about the airport before I get into what Congress can and can't do. The restrictions that were proposed by the East Hampton Town Board, particularly I want to give a shout out to Kathy Burke-Gonzalez for the great work she did, were reasonable. We supported them, and we felt that the airport, and we still continue to feel that way, is a matter of local control. So if the town board, town officials, and the people of the East Town of East Hampton decide to keep it operating or to close it, that's within their local control and their decision-making process. I drove today to Patchogue. Normally, on a day like today, it does take an hour, but if I try to do that during the summertime, it's 2 hours. I live in Mattituck. I'm very, very happy today to see some folks here from the North Fork as well, who can probably speak to the situation that they confront on a daily basis. And I would normally have said during the high season, starting around Memorial Day, but that's not the way it is anymore. I know that they talked about maybe the largest noise coming from around the airport. I have news for you. It's, and no pun intended, it's not just from around the airport. In fact, it's really not from around the airport. We get complaints starting in Miller Place, Brookhaven, to Wading River, to Northville, to Jamesport, to Aquabogue. I think they're probably flying over Crescent Duck Farm, maybe on the way to see the big duck in Flanders. to Mattituck, where I live, on a Saturday afternoon, if you're outside barbecuing, you can pretty much take their order for a hot dog as they fly over because they're that low. All the way out to Cutchogue, on their way out to East Hampton Airport. What we've done in Congress, the congressman has been able to, every year, he's been able to get an amendment through, and he just did it recently again, asking that the FAA reassess the North Shore route to address the noise impact on the affected communities, to improve altitude enforcement, consider alternative routes, and that includes an all-water route over the Atlantic Ocean. Most of these helicopters are flying out of the city, and there's no reason that they can't use an Atlantic Ocean route that takes them possibly over Georgia on their way into East Hampton. The other issue is the North Shore route, and that is the main issue here. They talk about flying friendly. That's a heck of a narrative from a group that has no intention of flying friendly. They transition constantly, and it's not because of poor weather or some sort of medical emergency. It's because it's just easier for them to do that. It's time saving, and it saves money. What we're looking for the FAA to do is to enforce the North Shore route. Congressman Zeldin just recently met with the new FAA administrator, Stephen Dixon. He was sworn in. There was one before him, Huerta. You couldn't get the time of day from this guy, all right? So now Dixon comes in. We meet with him, and we talk to him about the North Shore route. We talk to him about the South Shore route. We talk to them about enforcement, which really means taking them out over the Long Island Sound a good mile or so, keeping them above 25 to 3,000 feet. If they can do that, there's no reason they can't, and going around Orient on their way in. Transitioning when they have to, working with us. We want them to review all the comments that have been filed by individuals. We tried to have a hearing on that. We actually had a law passed, signed by the president that would force a public hearing on this. They decided to do workshops. Those workshops have been useless. So in the meantime, what we've done is we've put together, and I have information. Anyone wants to go ahead and contact me. My email is mark.woolley@mail.house.gov. That's 2 O's, 2 L's, EY. And what I will do is put you in touch with the Ombudsman program where you can email, call, and mail these folks at FAA with any noise complaints that you have. We have, the reason people say, well, why would you do that? Because when we meet with the FAA administrator, we produce that information, we produce the data. We have files thick with complaints, emails, primarily out of our friends on the North Fork who basically have had enough. They need to review, and I'm talking about the FAA, and respond to all of the comments filed by these individuals, elected officials, and community groups. We're continuing to work out on the North Fork and in Riverhead with two groups that are set up specifically to deal with the helicopter noise issue, and they're working very closely with our office. And what can Congress do? The best thing that we can do is you can't legislate everything. Okay, what you can do though is try to force them to the table to understand what the issue really is, and get them to at least enforce what's on the books until change is made. If we can get an all-water route over the Atlantic, we're going to continue to pursue that. But in the meantime, we want them to go ahead and enforce the North Shore route. I'm going to go back to a moment regarding the helicopter pilots. We haven't let up on them. They have the ability to work with us if they want. The high season is coming. It's time for them to give something, to go ahead and acknowledge that, you know what, we don't need a transition as much as we have been. What we need to do is also maybe not fly as low as we have been. Give something at this point. Continue to work primarily with Senator Schumer's office, and the senators play a very important role here in getting the FAA and the helicopter pilots to come to the table and to at least give something. So As far as our office is concerned, we're going to continue to work with the senators. We're going to continue to work with the community groups. And as far as East Hampton Airport is concerned, again, it's a matter of local control. If they decide to continue to operate or close it, we're going to support whatever decision is made.
Okay, thank you, Mark. All right, so we're going to open it up for the conversation now. What I'm going to do is, again, if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand. In the back of the room, Virginia Garrison has a microphone that she'll be able to share. I'm going to start, though, with Mr. Trunzo, who has a question he wanted to ask. So we'll get the ball rolling with him.
Okay, well, the question, if I have to begin with that, is to Mr. Woolley. I have in front of me copies of a couple of bills recently introduced in the House, and I think the second one's been introduced in both the House and the Senate. One is H.R. 5450, which is cited as the Cleaner, Quieter Airplanes Act. The second, which my friend Kent brought to my attention, is introduced by Congressman from Colorado, Congressman Neguse. That one is called the Aircraft Noise Reduction Act, 5423. 5423 would restore the town's ability to impose local control on our airport. So it would undo the damage that the court decisions have done to the town as a proprietor of this facility. Congressman Tom Swazi, who's from a district further west on Long Island, is a co-sponsor on both of these bills, and I would certainly urge Congressman Zeldin to join as a co-sponsor. The other thing I'll say before I let others ask questions is you can hear in Mr. Woolley's comments the level of frustration the congressman has experienced in trying to work with the FAA. It's a sad commentary that even a congressman has trouble getting the time of day out of the director of the FAA. Hopefully the new guy will prove to be much better. So anyone has any questions about those two, I'll be glad to share what I know about them.
If I may, to be clear, this is Administrator Huerta, who had been there for years, was the one we're talking about. Dixon has actually met with Congressman Zeldin in his D.C. office. He was very open and very amenable to continuing the discussion. Our staffs are still continuing to talk, and so we haven't given up, and we're not about to walk away from FAA. They are there, and we need to work with them. The other concern I have, I know you mentioned Congressman Swazi. I believe he's also pushing to make the North Shore route permanent. We haven't jumped on that, and at this point, that's something that we aren't about to keep that permanent if there's a possibility to have an all-water route over the Atlantic Ocean. While we'll look at it and continue to review it, that's not something that we've jumped out and supported.
Okay, we're going to go to the audience now. I'm going to ask everybody, just keep your comments and questions as brief as possible. We have about 50 minutes, a little under an hour. We want to wrap up sharply at 2 because we know everybody has someplace to be. But first question here, can you give your name? Can you stand up? Is it awkward to stand up back there? I don't know how that works. Remember, microphone up.
Sure. Hi, I'm Kathy Cunningham. I was formerly the chairperson of the Quiet Skies Coalition. Just in the interest of full disclosure, I am not in that position any longer. But I have a question for anyone who can answer it. I'm unfamiliar with the legislation that Pat was referring to in the Congress that would return local control to the town. But I know in my research over the years that exemption from the Airport Noise and Capacity Act of 1990 would have done that same thing for us, and that is something that can be had via an act of Congress. And I wonder if that's still the case. I don't know if this new legislation supersedes or undercuts that, but is the congressman willing to do that? Because that would solve a lot of problems for us. It would take us out of that area of jurisprudence, and we would be able to, for instance, close the airport on a foggy day so they're not flying in at 100 feet over homes, et cetera, and so forth.
I mean, yeah, that's something definitely I'd like to review as far as go back and take another look at the ANCA as far as that's concerned. The other two pieces of legislation that he mentioned today, I'm not familiar with them. I will be make myself familiar with them and see if that does supersede. I'm not clear on that.
And do you have anything to contribute here, Pat? Can you pick up the mic?
As I understand Congressman Negushi's bill, that's exactly what it does. Is it allows general aviation airports to be exempt from ANCA and impose operation restrictions.
Can I ask a question that anybody can answer? Is it true that in 2021, when the grant assurances expire, that doesn't necessarily return local control to East Hampton, correct? There are still restrictions on what the town could do. Could somebody answer that?
I think the key restrictions that are affecting us and enable us not to control the airport are gone. So at that point, closure is a possibility, and in the context of closure are some of the other ideas that I was talking about, ways to make the airport less capable, limit the type of aircraft, use noise regulation. So the key grant assurances that are problematic now would end and give us that right. And if I can just say one other word in response to Pat's comment about the FAA, I was a participant in a meeting with the FAA just after I got seated on the town board, and I walked away from that meeting not very enthusiastic about their willingness to help, and I still feel the same way. My comment about the FAA and negotiating when the issue of closure may be the context in which we're negotiating was simply that the FAA will still be important players in the discussion. I'm not really reposing confidence in what they'll do as much as suggesting that they have to be a part of the discussion, and the fact of closure does change the playing field a bit for the better for our ability to control the airport.
Can I just ask the elephant in the room? Is it a fact that the town is discussing closure partly strategically because it gives you a bigger stick? If the carrot doesn't work, you have more of a stick to try and find a compromise with the other parties involved?
I think you have to say that the possibility of closure is a real fact. It's not a strategy or a ploy. It's a reality. We're really going to discuss it, and we mean what we say when we discuss it. It's not just a ploy. Can it affect the negotiations? If there are negotiations, sure, it can. But we're not playing games and looking at that as an alternative. It's a real alternative. It used to be an extreme position. It's not an extreme position, and anybody that's heard anybody from Riverhead or Comac or Southold come into the town board absolutely at wit's end over helicopter noise can understand why closure is a real possibility.
Thank you. Jim Stone. I heard a lot of statistics today about the airport. What I didn't hear, can somebody tell me how many discrete individuals we're talking about? So as specifically the helicopters, how many individual people fly into the airport over the course of a year?
That's one of the things that we need to know and we don't. Attempts to, not even by disclosing their name, but just to understand how people who are arriving, where are they originating from, where are they ultimately going to go to, whether it's someplace in Southampton, Montauk, wherever. That information is not known by the town or the Airport Management Advisory Committee, and obviously needs to be understood if the town's going to attempt to make an intelligent analysis of the importance of this facility. Another way in which the commercial interests really have not been cooperative. They don't want to share that because it doesn't, it may give the other parties a little more power in the conversation.
Is it hundreds, thousands?
I don't have anything to add to that other than to say that one of the things that we will undoubtedly try to get some more data on is where people are going when they come to the airport, because that's an important part of the analysis of what might happen with closure, what diversion would occur. So we are going to make some effort to get more information on that.
Hi, my name's Tom McNiven. I've lived here full-time since 1984. Been a real estate broker from Southampton to Montauk since 1986. If you read my letters to the Star, you might think I'm an advocate for closing the airport, but I much prefer to find a way to keep it open. Back in the day, Paul Shearer, a pilot, used to fly my kids, take my kids up and fly them. Another pilot used to fly my parents over to Block Island to work. I really believe it should be a place for local pilots, and if we're going to do this, we need to find a way to make it work for everyone. There are two things I want to address really briefly. Number one is the safety issue, which hasn't been mentioned much here, but I had the opportunity to live at a house not too far from the airport and directly under the Echo route last summer. And I got to tell you, when the ceiling was low and the weather was bad, I feared for my life, and I felt really badly for the people in that neighborhood. It was terrible. It was horrible. And that something needs to be done to address that. It's not impossible to close the airport when the weather is bad. Something really bad can happen here. Something really bad happened here last summer, but it was over the ocean. And last week in LA, something really bad happened because of bad weather both times. So I think safety needs to be addressed as much as noise. As for noise, let me just say that as a real estate broker, as the traffic increases, property values diminish in a lot of places, and that's the tax base. And I heard people saying, well, it's a boon to our economy. It's a boon to our economy. Well, if you own a house out here and you've had it appraised recently and it's in a flight path, it's not helping. And so the long range on this is to find a way to make it not so bad. And I do believe that it should be a local airport for local pilots. I think we need to roll it back, and we need to find a way to work together to do that. I have no use for helicopters, and I'm sorry, I have no use for seaplanes. Thanks.
Do you have anything to say about the safety aspect, maybe, from the pilot's point of view?
We shouldn't be talking about what happened out in California. It's a little early for that. But I think the helicopter pilots here, they are very safe, and we haven't had any incidences out here. So I don't know what else to say about that.
Somebody else did.
I can only add that earlier this year, actually later last year, I had an opportunity to meet at the airport with the air traffic controllers and had a pretty long sit down with them. And they're highly dedicated people. They're obviously very skilled people, but it's stressful. Although East Hampton Airport is a small airport, what makes it extremely difficult to manage is the mix of traffic, and it's unlike really any other airport, and including major airports. We've had air traffic controllers that came from Kennedy International Airport, experienced people that could not handle the mix that we have in East Hampton. It's largely a large factor is helicopters. I mean, you have helicopters traversing the landing routes of big jets like simultaneously. And again, they seem confident to me. They're can-do people, but are they, this is me talking, not them, are they relaxed and, easy breezy? No. This is a very difficult mix of traffic to manage, and it's a problem.
Pat, did you want to add something?
Add a historical irony. Back when I was on the town board and assigned as the airport liaison, that's exactly what would happen at the airport on low ceiling days. It would be closed. We didn't have a control tower. That obviously makes a difference, but we didn't have an automated weather station, which we do now. But to me, it's absolutely objectionable, to use a polite word, that operators will do anything short of crashing to get here. They ought to show some respect and regard for the community that is here and not operate on those low ceiling days. And believe me, there are too many members of Quiet Skies Coalition who have experienced this, and it's scary for them, to say the least.
Hang on,
If I may,
With market chance.
on the safety issue, I beg to differ. There was an incident last year, I believe, in the Amagansett Bridgehampton area. We got a call from a homeowner who said that there was a near hit, not a near miss, over her house, and it was documented as well. But if it's not just there, it's the concern for safety up on the North Fork, where pilots are flying in over the Long Island Sound, over the Northville docks. You've got the big tanks there, and you're always concerned that maybe something could happen there. You have electric wires, you have tension wires. You're always concerned that maybe because of the pace that they're trying to get out here to move people out and get them here and then return, that there could be a lapse in judgment, and then something could happen. So safety is a major concern, and that's also part of the conversation that we recently had with the FAA administrator.
Okay. Any questions in the back? Anybody? I have a quick question for Kent. Something you said earlier struck me as interesting as a layman. It sounds to me like you've painted a picture where the airport could close and you'd still have the helicopter flights and the seaplane flights coming out, which are the two types of aircraft that I think bring the most noise complaints. And it sounds like that things like floating pads for the helicopters to land on, and obviously the seaplanes, that you could have a strategy here where you close the airport and not really address the noise problem. Am I correct about that?
That's our feeling, and it's already happened in Miami, where they have pads, and they're going to find another way to come out. They're innovative.
And it would also impact the private plane folks locally who are probably not the severe part of the problem for the noise, correct?
Are you talking about the general aviation enthusiast? Yeah, I would say no one is complaining about the noise from the small airplanes. In fact, this gentleman mentioned that, keeping it open as a general aviation airport. But
yes, sir.
My name is Michael Hansen. I live in Wayne-Scott. It is telling that the helicopter companies are not here this afternoon.
I want to stress again, too, that we did ask them. We made a real effort to try and have the helicopter companies represented here, and we were unable to do that. So
I understand that. And the troubling byproduct of their abusive behavior of the helicopter companies is that local companies associated with the airport would lose business. But my question is, are the helicopter companies working with anyone out here? I know Eastern Region try, but they have been, it seems, unsuccessful in getting anything across to these companies.
I have a little experience with the Eastern Regional Helicopter Association, and I will say Jeff Smith is a perfect gentleman, the representative. Not necessarily that makes him a cooperative person, but he's a likable fellow. But last summer when we had a brief disagreement about whether the southern route was safe or not, there was a period of time when all the helicopters abandoned the southern route. And I remember being out biking one afternoon, and it was over by Northwest Harbor, and a group of neighbors were there while the helicopters were rolling in or rolling out. And they were saying, "Can't you do anything about this?" And I realized in that moment that the Eastern Regional, what I found out later is that the Eastern Regional Helicopter Association put out a note to all its pilots, like, don't use the southern route. So we had this, this unusual and bad traffic situation. And as I'm watching this and talking to people who are saying, can't you do something about it? My realization was the Eastern Regional Helicopter Association had more control over routing in the sky than your elected officials in the town of East Hampton. Not a particularly satisfactory situation for us. I can add one other thing about helicopters flying low, and that is that there are rules called special VFR, which can be invoked when the ceilings are low and helicopters are availing themselves of these special VFR rules to fly in extremely low, a couple hundred feet or maybe even lower. And we've tried to reach out to the FAA, and we've complained about special VFR. and explained that it shouldn't be allowed in East Hampton, especially given the mix of traffic we had. I think I know for a fact that our airport manager, Jim Brundage, who is an old pilot and not a bold pilot and a good guy, doesn't like it and tried to help us with that. And we got nowhere with the FAA. So there are things that are beyond our control, and certainly they are driving us to this, to be or not to be situation with the airport. That's the reality of it.
Hi, I'm Gloria Burke from Southampton, and I have a follow-up to Joe's question, specifically for Jeff Bragman, which is the comment about these floating landing docks. Isn't that something that town boards can manage and not allow or put systems in place to mitigate their use?
Yes,
Like floating helipads, I think we're talking about.
I think that is something that we can control by zoning, and I don't think it's going to happen or can happen. And from what I understand, I'm not an expert on these floating docks, but I have spoken a bit to our aviation experts, and what they've told me is that when they refer to floating docks generally, like New York has some of them, they're not out in the middle of water, rocking and rolling. They're floating only in name. They're tied up, and they're actually part of the infrastructure. So I would say that's not going to happen. And I think I'd be leading the rebellion if anybody tried to put a floating helicopter in.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
That helicopter altitude doesn't really make any difference. If they're 3,000 feet or 500 feet, it reverberates. I live in North Sea, and you can hear them before you can see them. They come over Robbins Island. The reality is we don't need helicopters anymore, or we have to. I mean, there could be 10 at a time. 1, 2, 3. You can be sitting outside and not hear yourself speak.
Did you give your name?
Katie Milligan. Okay. Thank you, Katie. Yes, sir.
My name is Vincent Covello, and I have two questions, one for Pat and one for Jeff. Pat, you mentioned the 161, the Part 161, and I thought I heard you say that you'd like to consider pursuing that, and it was my understanding that the town decided to abandon that effort. I may have misunderstood when you brought it up. And for Jeff, what's the next step of the town? How can we, I'm a resident of Wainscott, what can we do, for example, to encourage that basic information? If we don't even know how many people are using the airport, it strikes me that's sort of beyond sort of baseline information. How can we proceed without that basic information? So is the town going to pursue a study as part of this future effort?
I'll let Jeff correct me if I'm terribly wrong, but the town has decided not to pursue an actual Part 161 study. I believe Bill O'Connor, the town's council, had a lot to do with that decision. And that's why, in my comments, I also said, well, we're going to end up doing a kind of similar study under maybe another name. Just one thing I know as a basic is government can't act arbitrarily and capriciously. The town wants to seriously consider closing the airport. It's got to do the homework necessary to back up such a decision. It's got to make an informed decision. Can't just wait till September 2021 and say, that's it. Turn off the lights and lock the gates. So there's got some homework that has to be done. And I think it's already late to have not fully started that homework.
Okay, Jeff, can you give us a little update about where the process is, what's coming next? And
Yes. Well, yeah, it is true that we were pursuing a Part 161 study, and we did decide not to. And we did have a public session with council, and he was giving us the advice that he could give publicly, which was that the time was short, the expense was great, and the likelihood of cooperation from the FAA was very slim. And if litigation was the, perceived solution to that, given the fact that we're bumping up against the end of the grant assurances, it didn't really make a lot of financial sense, or it didn't really move the ball forward. And it's very expensive to do. I mean, frankly, we could have embraced that and just used it as an excuse to say to people, oh, we're doing something. But we decided that it wasn't worth it. So we took his advice on that. And as to what we can do and how we can get started, that's why I talked a little overly long about the boring process of creating, a reasoned, deliberative kind of process, which I know we've spoken about in the Wainscott CAC. We do need to create a re-envisioning process that is heavily, that relies heavily on public input, and I think we have to do, we have to get consultants in to help us on topics where we need help. We have to limit the topics that we expose the public to in a given meeting so that we have, a lot of light and less heat from the discussion. And, that is a process that is hard to get our arms around. I could use your help, but we are in the process right now of reaching out and hiring some consultants, and I've started to get some maps together in the town. We're starting to get the wheels turning on going on that. And it is a process that I think the public is going to be driving, frankly. As I said, we lead better when we listen, and we want to listen to the public. I hope that we can avoid just having a free-for-all. We've had some big meetings in the LTV building where, 200 people come out and they vent. So I'm hoping that we can focus it, and if you have some ideas, I know we've talked about a revisioning process. I'd like to organize it. It's not going to be fast, and it's going to be long. And we need participation to get to a decision point.
Patricia, I wonder if I can bring you into the conversation. What do you say to people who live in Amagansett, Springs, areas of East Hampton town that are not so largely affected by the noise of the airport, but do perhaps have some say in the economic benefits of the airport? And you live in Noyak, which is not in East Hampton town. A lot of folks in Bridgehampton are affected. Folks on the North Fork are affected. But closing the airport would have the biggest effect, most likely, right in the area of East Hampton and in the town specifically. What do you say to people who would say that? Like me, I just did.
I can tell you very quickly what I would say.
Hold it up a little closer.
I would invite you to my house, actually. And I would say, come, spend the weekend. Come sit outside with me. Spend some days inside with me in summer when the air conditioning's blasting. Because I can't sit outside. Is the economic benefit to a few people worth the pain and suffering of thousands of people who will never have any economic impact from this airport? The answer is no. And if I could just make a couple of other points about safety, because a lot of the discussion about the airport for many, many years has been focused only on noise, and it's far more than that. It's the safety issue is there. We have these, not the local pilots, but the commuter pilots. I mean, their flights are reckless. They're at low altitude. They're at all times of the day and night. They fly in bad weather. We don't know who they are. We don't know whether they have the credentials to fly on instruments. Seaplanes are flying over our houses at several hundred feet in fog. Are they flying on instruments or are they flying blind? We don't know. The chap that flew into the, well, he didn't fly into it, but he became disoriented last summer and flew into a high-rise building on 7th Avenue. He unfortunately crash-landed, but it was very bad weather. He had tried to wait it out sitting at the helipad, and then he decided he was going to take off. Nobody stopped him. I mean, is that happening at East Hampton Airport? I don't know. These pilots are coming in, they're flying, they're not local, they don't know the weather conditions the way our pilots do. Some of them are from Miami or, the Caribbean. They come up here, they're part-time people. We don't know anything about them. That's dangerous.
Maybe Eric or Kent can speak to the pilots who do use the airport in terms of safety.
I would disagree with the statement that flying is not safe. I mean, I think in general, if you look at the overall industry, it's very safe. The unfortunate thing about aviation is when there's an accident, everyone talks about it and it's publicized. And you don't hear about all the car accidents, the terrible motorcycle accidents out here. So the pilots are all very professional that we know that come in and out of here. And they work in a system that is very specific. And whether they're flying IFR or VFR, they are doing it with incredible judgment and skills. There are not a lot of issues overall. I know we can talk about one or two here and there, but I don't believe the safety thing is the real argument here. I'd like to ask Jeffrey about the economic impact study. We keep talking about the economics of it, and we have people from both sides. Are we going to move forward with an economic impact study at some point in this process?
We, the town, are you talking about? Yeah, I think an economic analysis is going to be a part of this re-envisioning process. It's certainly going to be, it certainly should be a topic for an evening, I would think. And I would assume that the study that this gentleman referred to earlier might be a countervailing study to what the town comes up with.
2014 study, right?
Yeah, I remember that from when I was involved in some of
A lot has changed
the litigation.
in 6 years, and I think it'll clarify a lot of things if we do one.
I think it's important for us to know what the real impacts are. I mean, I don't want to be snarky about it, but I would think the focus should be primarily on East Hampton. I don't think a helicopter who lives in New Jersey's salary is a particular impact that's of great moment in East Hampton. But I assume that we can, again, exchange facts and have a reasonable discussion on that. Should definitely be one of the topics, and an important topic.
I wonder if I can bring Evan in. In the opening question, you talked a great deal about the economic impact. What Patricia is saying is, whatever the economic impact, there is a quality of life impact on neighbors. How do you balance that out? Coming from the other side of this equation, what's your answer to that?
I mean, certainly the concern she has, safety and otherwise, the environment is key. As Eric said, they're moving towards electric aircraft and some other changes. The renewable energies and renewable fuels as well for the aircraft. We see business aircraft out at MBAA this year operating on biofuels. As far as overflight over everybody's houses, I think there was a card passed around on the back of that, has this year's routes. They're putting everybody, for the helicopter operators anyway, I know there's still a discussion we have with the seaplane guys. They're putting everybody out all the way on the North Shore route, all the way out to Plum Island, and then turning in, so they won't transition across the North Fork, cutting out the concern that Mr. Woolley raised about the tanks over there. And that the inbound and outbound, it's being called the Echo route, is the primary route, so that'll take them all the way out around the North Fork and down the North Shore route to bring them in and out, which should alleviate some of those concerns. And the airport does bring a big economic benefit. I mean, I know the study, like I said, is from 2014 that I had, and like Ken said, things have changed since then. The airport has certainly gotten busier and needs to be addressed.
Mark and Jeff, has the problem been the voluntary routes that everybody is asking the helicopters in particular to use are obviously longer routes that are going to require more fuel, more time, and that's why you're having trouble. Are you having trouble with individual pilots agreeing to that, or is it the association, or is it both? Mark, you want to?
Sure, it's both. Bad answer, but it's both. You have pilots who are, people are calling them cowboys. I don't think the cowboys of the 1800s acted anything like this. These people are flying in low at all hours of the day and night and making people's lives a shamble on the North Fork. FAA's got to come down on these folks to go ahead and and enforce that route. As far as the Helicopter Council's concerned, again, while they're not here, and they should have been here, represented here, we aren't giving up on meeting with them and trying to get them to do something now. Both are at fault. They're all to blame for acting the way that they do and not taking the initiative to say, you know what, we can actually do some things. We can actually give. We can actually go out over the water, try not to transition as much, maybe cut that down a bit. Try to stay. I know people talk about maybe the elevation doesn't work, and you're probably right. But, you still need to have them up higher than what they are because they can't be flying in as low as they do and basically coming in over people's backyards where you can read the numbers. You just look up, and we're getting reports all the time. We get emails. I get data that go right to our files, and the tail numbers and what if you can get that information when they're flying over, that tells me these guys are pretty low. They probably, it looks like they're flying through your kitchen to go ahead and grab a cup of coffee on the way through. It's unfortunate that they are taking this tact and that they don't want to listen. But we're not going to give up. Like I said, we're working with in this instance, Senator Schumer's office to go ahead and get, you mentioned Jeff Smith, to get him to the table at this time before the high season comes into play and try to agree to give something. Okay, that's all we're asking at this point. You can give something, work with us so that we can, until we get the FAA to come down and do its job, which is to enforce the North Shore route and possibly go ahead and implement an all-water route. We need these pilots to work with us.
Okay, Jeff, you wanted to add to that?
Can I say
wanna
something
add
really quick?
Jeff-
In Jeff Smith's defense, he there was a conference, not a conference, a helicopter expo in California, so he did have a scheduling conflict. We did reach out, though, to a number of private helicopter companies with absolutely no luck.
Can I
Jeff-
just want to add a comment, if I may?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
A quick comment. The thing about changing routes in the sky is that compliance is voluntary. So, that sort of is the end of the question on it. It's and frankly, I've been involved in airport issues not as long as Pat, but for a long time, and involved in some litigation. And I feel strongly that changes in routing in the sky will not fix the problem in East Hampton. The problem in East Hampton is the quantity of traffic that we have. We must reduce the quantity of traffic in the East Hampton airport because we can't continue this way. And changing the routes in the sky may temporarily make it okay for me and worse for you. It's not a solution. It's not something, it's worth trying if they have an idea. I know every time I talk to Jeff Smith, he says, and I believe him, he says, we get pretty good cooperation on compliance with this routing. But I still hear people from places far from East Hampton coming in and saying, you're wrecking our lives, and we can't have that.
I'd like to add a little bit
You're good.
of our perspective as an operator. Two things I want to address. First of all, at Shoreline Aviation, we have been at the forefront of getting the noise complaints. We get many of them directly. They call our 800 number and say, your airplane just flew over our house. So we've been dealing with this forever. And as a result of the compromises that have been suggested, as a result of the new routings that have been made, we've made a number of operational changes. The issue is we're not the only seaplane operator, and all the seaplanes look alike. So when we change our procedures so that all of our transits above the North Fork, as long as the weather allows, are 2,500 feet and above, and frankly, you can't hear a caravan passing at 2,500 feet. Just because we're doing that doesn't mean that the competition is doing that. And we all get lumped together. Some people barely bother to distinguish between a seaplane and a helicopter. We're all just too loud and we shouldn't be up there. Secondly, as far as a point that was raised earlier regarding safety, as I mentioned, we've been in business for 40 years. I've been doing this for 20 years. I have 17,000 hours of flight experience, and I am not the senior pilot in my group. We do not have inexperienced pilots. We do not have pilots without instrument ratings, period. They're not allowed. And all of our aircraft, every single of the 11 aircraft in our fleet are equipped with the latest state-of-the-art safety equipment. We have synthetic vision. We have the ability to fly the GPS WAS approaches, which are a precision approach in and out of runway 10 and runway 28 in East Hampton. And we have terrain awareness and traffic collision avoidance systems installed in all of our aircraft.
Pat, you wanted to add
Yeah,
something?
just a couple of quick additions to this conversation. One is, I know the all-water route would be enormously welcomed by North Fork residents, Shelter Island people. I have to say, though, and Jeff has already said it, it's not a solution because all-water routes are going to inflict all of this traffic on East Hampton. So routing is not a solution. I agree with Jeff. Needs to be a change in the level of operations here. And one other thought in relation to that, we have a responsible operator with us today The commercial interests here are being incredibly stupid. They are playing a zero-sum game. And they've won in the shorter term, but eventually they're going to lose. I mean, it may take a long time, which is one of my big problems with closure. I don't think it's going to be achieved in any time soon. I mean, if you look at Santa Monica, which is a recent example, closure is going to happen 11 years after the decision was finally made with the FAA's approval to close it. So I look at the interests involved here. I look at the players involved here. You've got very wealthy people using these services. You've got big, national organizations. The MBAA calls in to every one of our airport management advisory committee meetings to listen. So they're paying attention, and I know why they're paying attention. They want early warning of anything that could adversely affect their interests. So I expect them to litigate at the first drop of the hat. So there has to be, to me, cooperation amongst all the parties here is the shortest, most secure or safest bet to alleviating this problem. But it has to include cuts in the numbers of operations. And as a small example, New York City achieved that with the helicopter tourist flights. They threatened to close the heliports, and all of a sudden the industry said, "Oh, we'll agree to a 50% reduction." So it's not absolutely unheard of.
I also, just as a layman, can I ask you, Pat or Jeff, explain to me why the FAA or the town is unable or unwilling to try and enforce rules as far as low flight and things that cause the most noise, things that are the most dangerous. You say it's got to be voluntary. Can you explain to me as a layman why it has to be voluntary?
Town has no jurisdiction or authority over aircraft in flight. That exclusively is the province of the FAA.
And why wouldn't the FAA step in if safety is an issue?
Because they're a captive regulator. They don't want to curtail.
Okay. We have a question back here, and I'll get to you.
Hi, John Cullen. I live on the North Shore over in Northville, 20 miles away from your airport. To me, your airport is broken, and that's why we're all here to discuss the airport. I believe it's broken, and that's why we're all here. We're trying to fix it, and you're going to need more than a couple of Band-Aids to fix it. We're talking about economics was brought up. Airport being on the corner of the town. Are you talking about economics in the town of East Hampton? Or are you talking about economics in the town of Southampton? That's one of the issues. I, unfortunately, have a bullseye on my house, and that's why I'm here right now. I live under the North Shore route where they come over, transition over the land. And like you said, I've been to the town board, and I've been to the AMAC meetings many times. And it's just unbelievable how poorly this airport is run right now. I'm very disturbed that Eastern Region Helicopter Council is not here. Jeff Smith's not here. I understand he's in California, but it's a council. There are more people to that organization. Somebody should be here. I'm upset the FAA is not here. I am also upset that I don't see Mr. Jim Brundish, the airport manager. He should be part of this discussion. He's the one who's running that airport over there. As far as safety goes, yes, there have been some major accidents recently, and also there was a near miss over Bridgehampton this year that was about 80 feet apart, where a helicopter and a seaplane came 80 feet apart and made major moves to get away from each other. In other words, a hard right and a hard left. And that was witnessed by somebody that I've spoken with, and she has told me how close it was. Another thing we're talking about here, the safety is just a major thing. I live 20 miles away. And on Monday morning, if I look up, I'm seeing 24 crafts going over my house, and I'm seeing them boom, boom, boom. Some of them are riding together side by side 200 feet away or 300 feet away. The safety is incredible. I have pictures over my home of what's going to your airport 20 miles away. Now, unfortunately, Monday mornings is a big thing for people to get back to work in New York City. But what happens is the airport, I believe, opens at 7 o'clock. And it's like a wolf pack of people going into that airport. Once that 7 o'clock bell rings, they're all nosediving right in there. It's just horrible. I've mentioned this to the town board many times. I've mentioned all things. And another thing about the airport being on a major aquifer for the town of East Hampton, probably draining into Southampton with 30,000 landings and takeoffs a year. The business has gone up, up, up the last 20 years. Do you think it's going to go down this year? I don't think it's going to go down this year. Mark, I agree with you on the South Shore route. Mr. Atkins, I get seaplanes over my house at 600 feet on clear blue days like today. I've had conversations with your competitor, Tropical Airways, down in Florida. I've talked to them multiple times because not only do the seaplanes come over my house on the way to your airport, they come leaving. When they leave, they go back over my house. At least Eastern Region Helicopter Council has been able to at least divert the helicopters another way out. In other words, going out over Southold or going out over going out to the ocean. That's a little helpful for us. But the seaplanes are killing us. And they're not at 2,500 feet all the time. I can tell you, I've called Tropical Airways. Now, I know it's your competitor and it's not your organization, but the seaplanes are loud when they're low. And when they're coming over my house at 700 feet on a day like today, it's totally, totally not needed. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, you're good.
And one last thing. You know what? I think I already mentioned the airport as far as the aquifer goes. It's been tough living this. The airport is broken. I'm not even sure if it can be fixed personally.
We appreciate you coming down today and appreciate you sharing.
Hi, my name is Catherine Sly. I am a local resident of East Hampton. I am a local business owner of East Hampton, and I'm also a local pilot of a very small airplane. I have a couple questions for Jeff Bragman, actually. Mr. Bragman, you've made it clear today that closure, both you and the town board have made it clear that closure is your #1 priority. In fact, you today called the airport a blank slate, just ignoring the fact that it's been an airport there since 1936, and that you've made it clear that your entire purpose of being here and that your main goal is to go through this re-envisioning process of what you would like to do else with the land other than have it be an airport. Your colleagues on the town board have said that, publicly have said that closure is the likely outcome in 2021, and that once grant assurances expire, we will have the opportunity to actually close the airport, and that's where we'll end up in 2021. So it's been pretty clear that you yourself and other board members have made it very, very clear that your entire focus right now is closure of the airport. You've been here today and you've been hearing some of the community members who live here, the vast majority of which says that they actually don't want the airport closed. They just want it controlled. So my question to you is basically why, in light of the significant negative consequences which closure would cause, such as the loss of over $48 million in revenues to our local East End community, of which 13, excuse me, can you guys not be rude? Thank you. As well, of which 13 million of that is salaries for our community alone, and 650 jobs are created through the airport's presence. Not to mention the fact, as Mr. Feuerring had pointed out earlier, that if you close the airport, the helicopters are not going to go away. In fact, there's going to be more of them. And this is... Okay, let me just finish my question to him about this. About the fact that, like I said, the helicopters will continue to come. You said earlier, you misstated the fact that the floating helipads would be subject to town control. Here's a picture of them. They're actually boats, and they park in navigable water. This is them operating in Miami already. They're not connected to a dock. They're not connected to your foreshore. They're going to be out in the middle of the navigable water north of Sag Harbor, where you'll have absolutely no control over them. And these helicopter operators are going to be coming in, instead of having 30% of the share of the commuters that are coming in, they're going to have 100%. There will be no control over them. They will come in, they will land at Southampton Heliport, they will land at Montauk, they will land at floating helipads in Sag Harbor, and you will have an inundation of helicopters over our community. So by closing the airport, instead of stopping the helicopter problem, you're going to actually blow it up and create a massive concern to our community of thousands of uncontrolled helicopters of which you have absolutely no control. As he said, in flight, you can't do a thing about them. What are you planning on doing, and why is closure your number one priority if this is going to be the result?
Jeff, I think that's you.
A bit of a filibuster there, I think. I have to disagree with you about what I said. I did not say, and I actually don't think the town board, I don't speak for the town board. Some of you may know that already. I don't think the town board has ever said its number one priority is closure. What we are saying is that it has changed from what was, I think, an extreme position maybe 5 years ago into a viable alternative. And actually, the alternative of closure may give us some advantages in our ability to actually control the airport. And when I spoke earlier in my comments as I began, I explicitly said I wanted to ignore, what I was trying to say was that we do have to consider alternatives that are non-airport alternatives. And we do, I think, have an obligation to look at that town property as a blank slate to consider those alternatives. But I went on from that and I said, ignoring that, there are significant moves that we could make to control our airport. And I listed a whole bunch of them, that we could examine our infrastructure and make the airport, change the airport's capabilities. We could examine whether, what kind of services we wanted to provide. In the context of closure, as an option, I think we would have more power to impose noise restrictions based on FAA noise signatures, and I went on and on. I don't want to repeat it. So I think, Catherine, that you've misstated a little bit what I said. And as to floating helicopter landing pads in the town of East Hampton, I'll just say I've been a zoning and planning attorney for 30 years, and I've led a lot of battles out here. And if you wanna try it, I think you'll have a fight on your hands, and I'd be happy to help oppose it. I don't think it's going to happen. We have very long jurisdiction under our zoning code, and I think you might find it a little difficult to go from idea to reality on that kind of a plan. But I will say, the idea of diversion of helicopters is a legitimate concern. And that is a topic that we would have to discuss in a deliberative and fact-based way, because we are aware of the fact that helicopters can land elsewhere. Montauk is certainly a consideration on our mind, and it's not something we can ignore. But overall, my response to your comments, I know you, Catherine, we've met, is that I think I hope that we can create a methodology where we can all sit down or stand up and talk to each other in a deliberative way about the topics that you just mentioned. Helicopter diversion is an important one. Closure as the only alternative is something we can discuss logically. But it's never been my position that closure is the number one priority.
Okay, one last question. We're running out of time here, so.
Teresa McCaskey with South Hill Town Helicopter Advisory Committee. I actually have a few comments I'd like to mention here with regards to the parties on the board. One of them with regards to the Part 161 study, which I believe one of the topics was stated it would never be fairly assessed. And correct me if I'm wrong, but seaplanes are not categorized as any type of staged aircraft. In order to have the Part 161 study to be a thorough study, that particular study is based on staged aircraft. Correct me if I'm wrong if a seaplane is not considered a staged aircraft. It is not a staged aircraft. So if everyone leaves here understanding that a Part 161 study will never be properly analyzed or assessed to the FAA, therefore that would be a waste of money, of taxpayers' money. Okay, so
meaning, let me try and translate that. So what you're saying is, if the airport were to close,
no. I'm sorry. If the town board opted to go through
and
with
takes
a full
control,
Part 161 study, that would, everyone in this room is under the assumption that that is based on every single aircraft that is landing at East Hampton Airport. In this scenario, that would not be the case.
Okay.
The case would be every seaplane would be eliminated from the study.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
So
Can I
thank
make
you.
a quick comment? Teresa is correct that ANCA, and therefore Part 161, is only targeted at certain staged aircraft, mostly Stage 2. In theory, however, seaplanes are not subject to ANCA and could be regulated without going through that process.
So there's other tools to adjust
Well,
seaplanes.
I'm just saying, we know they're a problem. They're not in the same category as the helicopters, which are stage classified aircraft. So seaplanes, in theory, legally, are in fact controllable without having to do a Part 161.
Okay.
That's a very interesting. Okay. Also, with regards to safety, since safety has been a bit of a topic here, I'd like to let everyone know that only 20% of all helicopters flying in the United States of America are equipped with crash-resistant fuel system. With that said, in the 2018 FAA reauthorization bill, older model helicopters are exempt from being mandated to be retrofitted with crash-resistant fuel system. So whether they land on land or they land in the middle of the water, only 20% are equipped with crash-resistant fuel system. So how is that safe for anyone? They are not a safe aircraft. So I just wanted to point those topics out. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming down. Appreciate it. Okay, we're at 2 o'clock. If anybody has any last second observations, then we'll wrap. I actually I was talking to the board. I wanted to give them a chance, the panel. But we're going to continue this conversation. This was to get it started. I think it was a really healthy, I think we learned a lot today, and I think it's a good exchange. I hope it continues. I hope it sparks a lot more conversations going forward. So I want to thank Rowdy Hall and LTV and our sponsors, and I want to thank everybody here for coming out today and all of our panelists as well. Thank you, please.